Kentucky, 1911. A group of railroad men set out at dusk to inspect the old trestle over Pope Lick Creek. The job was simple: tighten bolts, clear debris, and be gone before the midnight train. But when the fog rolled in, the forest grew silent. No wind, no insects, only the faint sound of something moving beneath the bridge. Moments later, one of the men swore he heard his own name called from below, and the night's work turned into something none of them would return to finish. So, before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. In 1911, I worked as a section crew east of Louisville. Our stretch ran through fields, pasture, and a narrow cut that led to Pope Lick Creek. That week, the foreman sent us to the trestle to check the bolts and braces after a heavy rain. Water had swollen the creek and driftwood had struck the lower piers. I had 5 men with me and a handcar loaded with spike mauls, lining bars, wrenches, a gauge, a bucket of bolts, and 2 carbide lamps. We pushed off from the siding near dusk and pumped through low country where mist rose from the creek bed. The rails were dark with creosote and sweat from the day's heat. Our orders were to tighten every fish plate across the span, replace cracked hardware, and clear any snags from the outer brace where the creek turned. A freight from the east was due after midnight. We had a timetable folded in the foreman's pocket and a brass watch to check it. Foreman Briggs was a hard man with a stiff jaw and steady hands. He watched the clock more than he watched the sky. Caleb Dunn was a broad fellow from Taylorsville who kept a string charm under his shirt and watched for signs and small things. Oakes had a sharp mouth and a quick laugh even when no one joined him. Eli was young, thin, and fast on ladders. He walked the ties with a clean balance that made the rest of us slow down. Heron Pike spoke rarely and lifted heavy ends of rail by himself without complaint. We had a new man, Miguel, who listened more than he spoke. He watched how we set a bar under a tie and moved as if he had done it elsewhere, under different bosses. We had stopped at a store in a small cluster of houses not far from the right-of-way. An older woman behind the counter asked where we were headed. When we said the trestle, her lips pressed together. She told us to keep a lamp turned toward the creek and not to heed voices that called from the dark. She said a thing under that bridge pulled people toward the rail. Briggs thanked her and paid for bread, a tin of beans, and a little flask of kerosene. He gave no room for her words. I kept them anyway. I had heard men talk of a goat man near that bridge when I first joined the crew, mostly to pass time, but the stories always ended in names of the dead and missing. I weighed whether to speak and decided against it. Too many words at the start can turn men toward fear before any proof. We pumped the handcar to the north, and the ground fell away. Trees leaned in, and the air turned cool and damp. The sound of water slid through the ties. We coasted to the edge of the trestle and stopped. The span rose over the creek with timber bents and iron braces. The ties were old but solid. Our lamp set a weak circle of light that showed only the nearest boards. The far end of the trestle was a dark mouth over brush and water. The smell under us was creosote, wet wood, and mud. The sound of insects came in a thick field and then thinned in the open where the span stood above the creek. Briggs gave tasks in a flat voice. Eli and I would walk the first third with the gauge and the wrench bucket. Heron and Miguel would carry the spare bolts and follow to replace anything cracked. Caleb would take a red lantern and walk 300 yards upslope to flag any surprise traffic, then return and stand the center watch. Oakes would clear drift near the outer brace and keep an ear to the rail for the soft hum that sometimes came long before a whistle. We all checked our lamp fuel and the fit of our boots on the ties. Briggs set his watch and said we had 2 hours to tighten, another hour for drift, and all of us off the rails by 11:45. The ties had a thin layer of grit from the recent flood. Each noise carried. Boots on wood, iron on iron, a quiet cough. We kept space between us in case wood gave way. The creek below moved slowly around a bend, then broke over stone. A train whistle far off would have sounded over the water, but there was nothing yet. The first fish plates were fine. We oiled one bolt and moved on. The second set was played. Eli steadied the wrench, and I leaned on the bar. It bit, turned, and drew the plate tight. A thin bleat rose under the span. It was a small sound and close. It lasted a breath and stopped. Eli looked at me. I looked down through the gaps. A few sticks turned in the slow current. A pale patch lay against the outer brace where drift had lodged. I told him to watch his step and keep the wrench steady. The air carried a sour animal musk and damp earth. Caleb called from the bank to ask if we'd heard it. Briggs told him to keep to his post and hold his lantern high. We found hairs caught on a splintered tie where something had rubbed against the wood. They were coarse and pale. Heron said it was goat hair. We had seen goats in the fields past the cut, but none would be on a high trestle. Oakes laughed and said some farmer had lost a dumb animal. He swung his hook down to pull a branch from the brace and found a length of rope snagged on a bolt where no rope should be. It was neat and old. He held it up. No one claimed it. He set it aside on the tie and moved on. The first odd bolt gave against the wrench and snapped at the threads. Miguel had a new one ready, faster than I expected from a new pair of hands. He slid it through and set the nut. He had a scar on his thumb, a clean line from some other job. He met my eye once, not long, and kept on. I felt that he worked steady. Eli paused again and looked at the dark understructure. He whispered that someone had called his name. Not loud, just the way his father had said it when he was a boy in the yard. He rinsed his lips and said he was fine. I told him to stick near and mind the gauge. My chest tightened a little. I thought of the woman at the store. I still chose not to pass her words to the crew. The best guard for the mind is work done right. Caleb came back from the grade with the red lantern. He had set a flag where the cut straightened out and a curve beyond would give us time. He stood near the center and watched either end. He did not talk much, which was unlike him. His mouth stayed tight. He kept the lantern shoulder high, then waist high, then set it near his boots and flexed his fingers. Those small motions told me he held his fear down and kept his duty. Oakes said that he smelled something wrong under the outer brace. Miguel steadied his ladder, and Oakes climbed down 3 rungs to pull at a tangle of drift. He found a small stack of stones on the ledge where no one should be. 3 stones flat, then 2, then 1. No mortar, no reason. He nudged them, and they toppled easily. He came up quiet and did not make a joke. I checked the next plate and felt a faint hum through the metal. I thought first of a train far off. I set my ear to the rail. Nothing steady. The hum ran in a short line and quit. The rail held no true vibration. The sound had come from below, then passed along the braces, then died. I told Briggs. He looked at his watch and told me to keep working. His voice had the same flat tone, but he drew a tight breath afterward that only someone near would hear. We moved forward and the air turned cooler. The insects went still for a few breaths and then returned. I do not add meaning to that. It happened, and then it passed. A sliver of white moved under the span between braces. It was not a fish. It was not drift. It moved against the current for a moment, and then held still as if it gripped metal. Our lamps did not reach it well. The shape did not rise or sink. It waited there until someone turned the lamp toward it, and then it slid deeper into shadow. Li set the gauge on the next section. His hands shook a little. He breathed slow until the shake settled. He said again that he heard his name. This time it came from the bank past the far end. It had the same weight as before. He looked down the run of ties toward the dark opening. I set my hand on his shoulder and told him to name the gauge reading. He did. The numbers calmed him. Work calmed him more than my voice. Caleb called that he saw eyes under the trestle. He did not shout. He reported it the way a man reports a loose spike. 2 pale points reflected lamplight from below the center span, then blinked out. Briggs turned one lamp down and one up, then set the beam under the girders. Nothing there but wet wood and bolts and the slow turn of water. He told Caleb to keep watch and say it again if he saw it once more. Caleb said he would. He picked up the red lantern again and did not set it down. We reached the center. The height over the creek made the space feel large and empty, but our lamps kept it tight to our boots. The ties ahead ran into a patch of darker timber where floodwater had stained them. The stain ran in lines that pointed toward the outer brace. I checked each bolt and found 3 with light rust, 1 with a crack. Miguel had the replacement before I asked. His focus did not break. A low voice rose from under us. It did not speak words. It sounded in the throat and held a steady pitch for too long. It pulled at my ears in a slow draw. I felt the urge to step closer to the edge. I took a breath and counted to 4. The urge eased. Eli leaned without thinking. I caught his belt and pulled him back. He shook, then nodded. He thanked me under his breath. The voice stopped. Water moved and wood creaked. Nothing else. Briggs told us to make the far end fast and tighten the schedule. His jaw was tight now. The hard edge in him met something he could not name, and he pushed back with time and order. That was his way. I decided to follow that line. Fear spreads when order breaks. We worked on. Oakes kept his ladder near, but did not go down again. Heron checked every brace with a mallet. The sound of wood on wood rang except for one section near the outer edge where the note came dull. We marked it with chalk and planned to add a support when daylight came and a team could bring lumber. We did not have the weight or time for it. Now that another call came clearer. This time it carried a measure of speech. It sounded as if someone said Eli's name and asked for help. The voice was not any of ours. It was not a neighbor's drawl. It had a thin, breathy edge. Eli froze. His mouth opened. He turned his head toward the far bank again. I set my hand on him and said his name in a plain tone. He looked at me, then at the rail, then nodded and set the gauge again. I saw the fight in him. He won that moment. From the far end of the trestle, the shape moved across where the beam met the pier. It had the height of a man standing on the lower flange and the angle of a head that did not sit right on shoulders. It stood still and watched. We watched back. Our lamplight did not reach it fully. The pale points were there again, where eyes would be. It did not blink. For a count of 6, we held, and it held. Then it stepped backward and dropped from view without a splash. My chest went cold. I checked the timetable in my mind and knew we had less than an hour before the freight. Briggs told us to finish the far quarter and then clear the rails. He sent Caleb to the far end to stand with the red lantern while we worked toward him. Caleb hesitated, then went. His boots set a steady rhythm on the ties. The rhythm steadied me. I held to the work. We had to finish or leave it loose. And leaving it loose invites accidents of another kind. I chose the work. I told myself that careful steps and clear heads would see us through. I believed it enough to move. Caleb reached the far end and held the red lantern over his head. The light cut across the rails and showed a thin strip of gravel beyond the timbers. He turned once to us and nodded, and faced the dark grade. Briggs told us to tighten the last plates and then move to him in a single file. We worked faster than before, but kept hands steady on tools. A mistake here would cost a man his ankle or worse. Oak set his ladder aside and took a lining bar to test tie-ins for rot. Heran carried the bolt bucket with no sound but the faint clink of iron. Miguel stayed on my left and handed me hardware before I asked. Eli kept the gauge true and spoke only when numbers changed. A faint tap sounded under the span. It was not water. It was not wood. It had the sharp contact of hard material on iron. Tap, a pause, tap, tap. We all heard it. The pattern was not work. It came from the cross, bracing midspan, and moved slow toward Caleb's position. Briggs told Caleb to hold his line. Caleb did not answer at once. Then he called back that he was there and steady. The voice rose again. It called his name in a tone that held a memory of his mother when he was a boy and late for supper. He told us this later, but in the moment his shoulders lowered a little and he turned his head. The voice asked him to come look at something down the bank where his father had left a trap stake long ago. Caleb's father had trapped small game along creeks. Caleb stepped once to the edge and peered off the timber. Briggs barked his name. Caleb jerked and set both boots on the tie again. He raised the lantern high and said he was steady. I watched the set of his spine and believed him for that moment. We finished the last plate on our side. Heran chalked a note for day crew near the dull brace. Oakes muttered that the pattern of taps matched nothing he knew. He scraped the tie with his boot and found a thin trail of mud that had no leaves in it. It ran along the inner edge, where a foot would go if it had a split hoof. He did not say that word. He swallowed hard and closed his mouth. The man who joked most went quiet first. Briggs pointed us forward. We moved in a line, one man per tie space. I carried the wrench bucket and kept my eyes on the boards. The height to the creek pressed at the edges of vision, but I held the line of the rail with my focus. We reached the center of the span. The air grew cooler again, and the insects lost their noise for a breath. A low rasp sounded under the flange to my right. I pointed. Heron set his mallet down and lifted the lamp. The light edged a shape that clung to the vertical brace. It had narrow shoulders and a chest that rose and fell with slow control. The arms were long, the legs bent in a backward angle that did not match any man. The hair on the lower half was coarse and matted. The upper half was bare and pale. The eyes reflected the lamp, then did not, as if they chose when to take light. It held there with a firm grip and watched us. None of us shouted. The quiet held us until it shifted, and the iron gave a small groan. Then it dropped back into the dark, and the rasp moved away along the brace. Eli took a fast breath through his nose. He kept his feet grounded on the ties. He did not lean. He said in a flat voice that the thing's mouth had moved without sound when it looked at him. I did not see that, but I did not doubt him. Miguel asked Briggs for orders. Briggs said we would keep to plan, reach Caleb, and clear the span. He checked his watch. 11:19. The freight would pass the East Mile post at 11:32 if on time. We had to be off in good order by 11:28 to give a safe cushion. We moved again. The voice rose from under the ties near my boots. It said my name in the tone my brother used when he was drunk and wanted me to come outside and help him settle a foolish challenge. My brother had died in a mill accident 5 years before. No one on that bridge knew his voice. I stiffened and focused on the rail head. I said internal words I used in other hard moments. Count the ties. Watch your boot. Keep the line. The pull in the voice eased. Tried again with a different angle. It promised a quick end to long work. It promised a warm room. It offered the sense of a hand on my shoulder from my father. My father had never given soft comfort. The lie in that detail snapped me out of it. I said my name plain, and then said Briggs's name, and then Eli's. Naming the living pulled me back to the present. The voice faded and slid toward the far end. Caleb called that something was on the lower flange ahead of him. He kept the lantern up and did not leave his tie. He said it crawled hand over hand and foot over foot, like a worker who knew iron. He lifted the lantern again, and the glow showed, the head rise above the beam. 2 horns curved from the skull, not long, but real. The face below them held a nose and a mouth, but the proportion did not match ours. The mouth seemed both set and slack. It opened in a shape that made a dry cough, then closed. It stared at Caleb and held there as if a wire tied it to that place. Briggs told Caleb to step back 1 tie at a time and not to turn his head. Caleb did as told. The thing moved with him at the same pace, always on the lower flange, always just outside the edge of the lantern's strongest circle. I saw the control in it. It did not rush. It did not hide. It set a pace to test us. That detail turned my stomach more than a sudden leap would have. It knew the bridge dot we closed the distance between our line and Caleb by 8 ties. The thing swung 1 arm and set a hand with long fingers on the web of the rail, as if it could pull itself to the top if it chose. I read that as a warning. Oaks froze. Heron moved up and set himself between Oaks and the edge. Miguel kept to my shoulder. Eli whispered a prayer without flourish, only the words he had learned as a boy. The voice spoke from under the span again, but stronger. It did not bother with old memories, no. It issued a direct instruction to step onto the railhead and walk it to the center. The phrasing was plain. It did not shout. It presented the command as if it were the only logical next act in a series of tasks. My feet twitched. I grounded my heels and bent my knees. I told myself to lock joints and count breaths. Briggs said through tight teeth for us to keep contact with the ties. He repeated the command 3 times without pause. The repetition cut through the pull. I heard my own breath again and felt the weight of the wrench bucket in my hand. Weight is a fact that cannot be argued away by a voice. Caleb's lantern lowered a fraction as his arm tired. He shifted his grip and the lantern swung. The light sent a stripe over the creature's chest. Scars crossed the skin. The hair on its lower half was snarled with burrs. The hooves were dark and chipped at the edges from hard contact with iron or stone. No smell reached me then, only metal and damp wood and a faint scent of oil from our tools. A thin whistle sounded far to the east. It could have been wind in a gap, but the pitch matched the first draw on a locomotive horn when a fireman tests the line. Briggs looked at his watch again and then down the span. He made a choice. He told us to back toward the near end in an ordered retreat. Keep formation. Keep eyes on feet and on each other. He told Caleb to hold where he was and not yield another tie. His voice had the old authority again. It steadied us. We began to step back in sync. 1 tie, stop. Next tie, stop. The bucket cut into my palm. I welcomed the pain. It kept my focus in my hand and out of the voice. Eli moved with a precision I had not seen in him before. He did not shake now. He had found a line and stayed on it. Oaks held his breath too long and then let it out in a rough push. Heron anchored the end near the edge and kept his body between the group and the drop. Miguel counted in a low tone, only I could hear. His numbers kept my pace. The thing tested us. It flowed up onto the top flange and set 1 hoof on the tie end. The tie did not give. It could have gained the top easily, but it did not. It kept just out of reach and walked with us on the lower level. It was either waiting for a mistake or for the train. The second option formed in my mind without help. The legend did not need to be told again. The creature lured men onto the rail and held them until iron and steam did the rest. Caleb found a stronger voice. He said he would not move another step back. He gripped the lantern handle with both hands and raised it higher. The light shook. He set his jaw and held. The thing drew near to him and tilted its head. Its mouth opened again, and the dry cough came once more. The tone rasped against the beam. I had the sudden urge to throw the wrench bucket at it. I did not. A thrown tool would unbalance me and might strike a man. I kept hold. The whistle came again, closer, no doubt now. The east bend would carry it over the low field and into the cut. We had minutes. Briggs swore once under his breath, then spoke calm orders. He told Caleb to edge 2 ties toward a ledge just off the trestle where a maintenance platform extended. It was narrow, but it might hold him if a train passed. He told the rest of us to clear to the near end, get the handcar off the rails, and be ready to pull Caleb onto the platform if he reached it. We moved faster. The ties ran under our boots in a steady pattern. The voice returned at our heels, pressing, not pleading. It drove like a spike through thought. It ordered the centerman to set his foot on the rail now. It promised that the step would feel natural. Haran cursed in a flat tone and told us to keep our heads. He reached back and steadied Oaks by the belt when his foot drifted. Oaks grunted and adjusted. He did not argue. The man who mocked now obeyed without pride. We reached the near end. Miguel and I hauled the handcar off with Haran's help, while Oaks threw the brake lever. The car thumped onto gravel. We lifted it clear of the track. Briggs turned back toward Caleb and the creature. Caleb inched along the ties toward the maintenance ledge. The creature mirrored him. It was patient. It had done this before. That is the thought that struck me, not guesswork. A sense built from its measured steps and the condition of its hooves and the quiet, confidence in its movement across steel. The headlight glow from the east bend touched the cut. It painted the tops of the rails a dull line. The whistle rose in a warning for the trestle. Sound filled the space and pressed against the little circle of lantern light at the far end. Caleb had 2 ties to go. The creature turned its head toward the oncoming light, and then back to Caleb. It set one hand on the top of the rail and raised itself a fraction. It could gain the tie in a second. It did not. It waited for the train to bind him in place. Briggs cupped his hands and shouted for Caleb to jump to the ledge now. The word cut across the span. Caleb nodded once and moved. His boot slid on a damp tie, and he caught himself on his knee. The lantern swung out and back. The creature rose and placed both hands on the top flange. The headlight grew brighter. The rail began to hum with true vibration. The trestle took a tremor into its bones. I grabbed the coil of rope Oaks had found earlier from where he had set it by the ties. It was old, but sound enough for a throw. I tied a quick loop with stiff fingers and looked to Miguel. He took the other end without asking. We ran to the inner edge of the trestle, set our feet, and prepared to cast. Caleb set his hand on the post by the ledge and swung his body out. The creature lunged with a short, controlled motion that gave it the top of the tie. It reached. The train's headlight struck full down the span. We had 1 clean second to act. I threw the loop, and it caught Caleb across the chest. He gasped as the rope hit him, but grabbed it with both hands. Miguel and I pulled. The rope cut into our palms, rough and stiff, but it held. Caleb's boots scraped the tie once, then slipped off the edge. For a heartbeat, his weight jerked the rope, and we both thought it might snap. The creature's arm swung past where his boot had been. Its nails struck wood and left 4 clean grooves. the air filled with the rising metal shriek of the oncoming train. Caleb dropped onto the narrow ledge, slammed his shoulder against the post, and held still. The creature turned from him to us, eyes reflecting the headlight. They flashed once, then went dark. It drew itself upright on the tie and faced the engine's glare, as though the light meant nothing. The engine burst from the bend, firebox open, headlight white, its horn splitting the air. The beam struck the figure, and for an instant I saw every detail clear. Thin ribs under skin, coarse hair at the legs, long hands with joints set wrong, hooves cracked and worn smooth at the edges. A head tilted forward with horns, just long enough to cast two sharp shadows. It did not flinch. It stood between the rails and spread its arms, dot the locomotive hit. The impact sound was brief, heavy, final. There was no body left on the ties, just a smear, dust, and the smell of hot metal. The train screamed across the trestle, wind and noise pounding us flat. Sparks rose from the wheels. The ground shook through the timber and into our legs. We clung to the railing until the last car clattered over and the sound fell away into the cut. When it was gone, silence filled in too quickly. Only the slow rattle of loosened bolts and the hiss of the water below broke it. Caleb still crouched on the ledge, lantern miraculously unbroken beside him. His face was gray under the soot. He didn't speak. Miguel and I pulled him back with a rope once the rails cooled. He climbed up slow, eyes fixed on the empty spot where the creature had stood. Briggs checked his watch and said nothing. He looked at each of us and then down the track as though counting us. When he finally spoke, his voice came low and calm. He said we'd pack the tools, push to the siding, and file the report in the morning. Nothing else. No mention of what we'd seen. Just a report that the trestle was sound and one freight had passed without delay. We obeyed. Oakes picked up the wrench bucket and poured the scattered bolts back in. His hands trembled once, then steadied. Herring set the handcar back on the rails. Caleb sat on a tie until Briggs told him to move. Miguel took the lantern from him, wiped it clean, and set it in its bracket. We loaded tools, set our grips, and began pumping toward the siding. The air behind us stayed heavy. I kept waiting to hear the tap again on the braces, or the echo of hooves under the timbers. Nothing came. The night was clear, the creek's voice steady under the bridge. Yet I could feel that something had changed. The bridge felt empty in a new way, as if the wood remembered what had happened on it. We reached the siding near midnight. The station lantern burned low in the window. Briggs signed the maintenance log, leaving out everything that could raise a question. Bridge inspected, bolts tightened, debris cleared. One freight passed safely. He handed me the pencil, and I added my name under his. The others did the same. It was a quiet ritual we understood without words. When the paperwork was done, we sat by the track and ate cold beans from the tin. No one had much appetite, but it gave us something to do. Caleb spoke first. He said the creature hadn't looked angry. He said it had looked patient, like it had waited for us to come and knew the exact time the train would arrive. Miguel asked if he thought it was dead. Caleb didn't answer. Oakes muttered that you can't kill something that isn't fully in this world. Briggs told him to shut it and finish eating out at dawn. We checked the trestle again before the next run. The section where the train struck was clear. No flesh, no bone, not even hair in the splinters. Only 4 fresh gouges in the wood where the creature's nails had caught before the impact. They were deep and parallel, too wide for a man's hand. Briggs had me sketch them in the logbook margins. He didn't explain why, and I didn't ask Doc for the rest of that season. None of us liked working near Pope Lick Creek. The foreman rotated crews more often. Some nights, section men from other runs swore they saw movement below the bridge when a lantern light hit the braces. They said it might be a goat or driftwood or tricks from the water. Nobody went to check. It wasn't superstition. It was experience dressed as caution. Eli left the crew that autumn and moved north. Oak stayed but lost his laugh. He'd start to joke, stop halfway, and go quiet. Heron stayed steady as ever, though he started crossing himself before every new span. Miguel was transferred to another district and later sent a letter saying he'd taken factory work inland. No more rails, no more nights near water. Caleb lasted until the winter freeze, then quit. He said he couldn't stand the sound of distant whistles anymore. He never explained further. Briggs retired the following spring. He handed me his watch the day he left. It still ran, but the glass was cracked. He said he'd rather I kept time for the next stretch of men. I asked him just once if he believed what we'd seen. He looked past me at the tracks and said he believed in reporting what you can prove and keeping quiet about what you can't. That was the only answer I got. Years later, when freight runs increased and new steel bridges replaced the old timber, I walked the Pope Leak span one last time before they dismantled it. The creek had widened and brush had grown over the banks. The air felt the same, damp, faintly sour. The timbers creaked under my boots, though the day was still. The gouges were gone, replaced by new planks. I stood at the center and looked down. The water turned slow around a sandbar. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move against the current, keeping its shape where it should have broken apart. Then it slipped under the surface and did not rise again. I left the site without looking back. The bridge came down a year later. They built a new concrete span farther upstream. People still talk about strange cries in that hollow, or figures walking the old grade at night. I've never returned. The watch Briggs gave me still runs, but it loses a few seconds every day around midnight. That's all I can say. We went there for bolts and boards. We came back with something we couldn't name. The rail remains quiet now, but when I hear a whistle in the dark, I wait for the pause that comes after. If the pause feels too long, I don't look toward it. I've learned to keep my eyes on the ground until the sound fades, and only then do I breathe easy again.